Hey everyone, welcome back to Project Honesty, a podcast designed for young adults by a young adult to gain brutally honest, friend-like advice, as well as provide a platform for young adults to form opinions, color outside of the lines, take deep dives into current events, and most importantly, have fun. This is Project Honesty, navigating reality with real conversations and diverse opinions. Hey there, I am your host, Cadence, and I'm so excited to be back. We just got off of a very heavy 2 episodes. I do recommend still going to listen to them. They're all about Palestine and the problems in Palestine right now. So if you haven't already, go head over to Spotify or YouTube to go listen to those because they're pretty great. But today I am so excited to be talking about a lighter topic. We will be discussing things all about travel. I want to go over why I think travel is important, how travel has impacted my perspective as a white girl living in Canada, some of my favorite places to travel, and what the most impactful trip I've taken was, as well as some places that I want to go in the future. Before I start, I just want to say that privilege is something that impacts your ability to travel. So where you live, your income, housing stability, your job, so your socioeconomic status, and your parents, especially if you're young like myself, it depends on how important travel is to them. Like, for example, my mom values traveling and seeing the world more than my dad does. So that impacts how I see the world. And I'm grateful that I get to see the world. Not everybody can travel. Not everybody has that privilege. Not everyone can even walk outside their homes safely. The privilege to travel freely without fearing for my life is definitely something to not take for granted, because not everybody has that privilege. And a lot of things on here that I'll be talking about today, you have to have a certain amount of privilege for them. And unfortunately, not everybody gets to experience what other people get to experience. So not everybody gets to travel. So that will impact how they view the importance of travel and their perspective on the world. And so I just wanted to address that because it does impact how I talk about travel with having had the privilege to travel. Travel is important. Now, it's not important to everybody, I get that, but it is definitely important to me. It's a way to gain a better understanding of the world we all share. A lot of times when you travel, you get the opportunity to step outside of your privilege. Now, I talk about this a lot, not necessarily on here, but just in my life in general, is when you have the opportunity to step outside your privilege, do it, because it teaches you so much, and it really puts life in perspective. You can experience a different class of living that you're not used to. Like for me, I'm middle class in Canada, whatever that means to you, I don't know. There have been many definitions of the word middle class, but I would describe myself as middle class. And so when you go to a different country that doesn't have a middle class, or their middle class would be something like your country's lower class, it really changes how you view things. And it gives you that opportunity, again, to step outside your privilege and realize how much you have and experience a different culture. Living in Canada, visiting a different culture gives you so many experiences, not just cultural experiences, but like weather, for example. Like when I go to a tropical country, that is not like what it is living in Canada at all. How that affects your body and things, all things like that are reasons why I think travel is important. Another thing about why I think traveling is important is that when you're in a classroom learning and reading and observing all these different cultures, you don't necessarily get to be immersed in it. So when you travel, you get to be in that culture rather than read it. And you get to be hands-on in that cultural exchange and those experiences that you can't get from a textbook or from a documentary or from a classroom. Those are things that you can experience right in front of you. Going back to privilege, having the privilege to travel anywhere. Now, a lot of people think that traveling just means international, but traveling can be driving an hour away from your house to a part of your province where you didn't even know existed. So travel has a lot of different definitions. But I think when you have the privilege to travel, you get the opportunity to further understand how privileged you are. I'm going to get into that a little bit later when I talk about my Cuba trip, because that is something that was a real eye-opener on that trip for sure, and I'm grateful that I've had that experience. And travel is so important to me that if I were to have kids, I need them to travel. I think traveling, it just teaches you so many life lessons, things like being grateful, appreciating the land, a bunch of things like that. Travel can teach. I think travel also teaches independence. I've traveled alone on multiple occasions, and it's taught me a lot, and it's really fun. I love traveling alone. I love my mom, but sometimes traveling alone is really, really fun. It gives you a lot of understanding and growth. Again, going back to understanding the world around you, that is something travel is really good at giving you, is understanding and appreciating how others live, and then growing from that experience. And it gives you a lot of knowledge. If I didn't travel to the places I've traveled, I don't think I would be as knowledgeable as I am now. So that's pretty cool. Travel in general, depending on where you're traveling, gives you a sense of compassion and empathy for others. I'm going to get into that again when I talk about my Cuba trip and how those values were taught. So traveling has impacted my perspective in a lot of ways. Now, I will say travel to me is not just limited to international. Like, I think traveling is getting outside of your comfort zone and being immersed in something that you've never experienced. So I have done more domestic travel compared to international travel, but both things have taught me a lot. So when it comes to domestic travel, I get to see more of my country, the famous Rocky Mountains and the nature that it has. Got to go to Tobermory last year. Tobermory, Ontario is a beautiful place. Oh my gosh. It is spectacular. The water is freezing cold, but it's okay when you're wearing an 8mm wetsuit. And just the beauty of the rocks and the color of the water. And we got to snorkel some shipwrecks, which was really cool. That is something I will never get over. That is impressive. I got to go to Vancouver. That was a little bit when I was a little younger. We got to go to the Capilano Suspension Bridge, and I think we went to Granville Island. You get to see a bunch of different things. We went whale watching. That was freaking cool. If you ever get the chance to go whale watching in Vancouver. It is amazing. Like something everybody needs to experience. It is incredible. I've learned a lot from my own backyard. I don't need to cross borders to learn something because it's right there in front of me. When you're in your own backyard learning, you see so many mind-blowing things in nature that a lot of people only see through screens. The biggest example of this, so I'm from Alberta, and so the Rocky Mountains are basically my backyard. And they are the most beautiful mountains I think you could ever see. They are incredible. Like in Banff, in Kootenay, in Yoho, all of those mountains and those places and parks are so incredibly beautiful. And they're actually known internationally for their beauty. I get the privilege to see them every single day. And a lot of people that I've talked to when I've traveled to Ontario or other places are like, oh my gosh, I love the Rocky Mountains. I want to visit them one day. And it's crazy because it's like, oh, I live like an hour away from them. It's crazy that I get that privilege to be around them every single day. And most of the time, the Rocky Mountains are something a lot of people can only dream of. And so I'm really grateful to have that in my life. And domestic travel really gets you to feel and appreciate the natural resources that your home offers. It's taught me to be grateful for the abundance of those resources, especially being in Canada, the fresh water we have and the amount of lakes that we have. That is something to definitely not be taken for granted because it's amazing and beautiful. Another thing about domestic travel is you learn how to appreciate the traditional land that raised you. I was raised on traditional territory in Alberta, not necessarily in the holistic indigenous way of using the land, but still, the land that I live on now and have explored since I was little has raised me. Traveling it and experiencing it and feeling it has given me the deeper appreciation for it. And when talking about the land, traveling domestically shows you that you can use the land as both inspiration and as a tool. Just appreciating the natural, mind-blowing beauty of it. It is incredible that I get to wake up every single day and see mountains. That is the thing that I love talking about, is those mountains, because they are incredible, and I am glad I get to experience them every single day. When it comes to international travel, I haven't done the most, but the opportunities that I've gotten to travel internationally are amazing. So recently in March, April, I went to Mexico. That was really fun. When I was a little girl, I went to Disneyland. That was a fun trip, especially to have as a little girl. But one of the trips that I've taken that I want to talk about a lot on here is my Cuba trip. Now, if you're on the Instagram, Project_Honesty24, you would have seen some pictures from my Cuba trip. So go look at those. They're really amazing. The Cuba trip is something that has had a big impact on my life, for sure. Just some general international travel benefits. You get to see a different land and people and society and the ways of life. They're all different when you travel internationally, even if it's in the same area like the US. We still live our lives differently. And there's a big culture change, which I really, really love, because culture changes are really amazing to experience, but also witness. Most of the time on these international vacations, I have stayed at resorts, but my mom is really good at making sure that I get to experience the real raw things about travel and the reality of any country I visit. So I want to talk a little bit about Cuba, because Cuba was the best trip I have ever taken. It is amazing. On my Cuba trip, I stayed at a resort in Veradero. Veradero is like the tourist town. There's a lot of resorts along the peninsula, and it's really, really beautiful. It's known for its water, and I think it's also known for some of its coral, but it's a very, very beautiful place to stay. And I'm going to talk about a few experiences that I had in Veradero and in Havana, because a lot of those experiences had a big impact on me. One day, me and my mom so this is a girls' trip. She took me to Cuba, which was very, very nice. Thank you, Mom. And so my mom has been to Cuba on multiple occasions. She knows a lot about Cuban culture, and so I was told how Cuban culture differentiates from our Western Canadian culture. And the culture difference in Cuba has a lot to do with the politics of the country and the political interferences on the country. So one big example of this is Donald Trump being the president of the United States at one point. That had a lot of negative effects on the country and made it so that poverty wasn't uncommon in Cuba. When you look at the difference between pre-Trump Cuba and post-Trump Cuba, there's a lot of things that changed. When Obama was president, he really, really helped the Cuban people, but then when Trump took over, it had severe impacts on the citizens in Cuba. And a lot of people struggled to live. There's a lot of money differences in Cuba. So Cuban currency is worth like nothing. I don't even think they use pesos, but the actual Cuban currency is basically useless. And so with Cubans finding no real value in their own currency, they really want Canadian money because the US screwed them over. So they're like, okay, we don't want that. So when you go and visit Cuba and you're Canadian, Canadians are Canadian in Cuba, you are treated so great, and it has something to do with your currency. One day on the resort that we were staying at in Veradero, an employee at breakfast asked us for Canadian cash in exchange for his Canadian coins, because another thing about currency in Cuba is that coins don't mean anything. So if you give someone a toonie in Cuba, you can't use it because it's worth nothing. But when you give paper Canadian cash, that is worth something. So when we were at breakfast, he came over and he was like, do you have change, because to us, the coins are money. They're still currency to us and we can use it. But to them, it's nothing. So he was like, can I change this out for a bill? And we were like, oh, of course. So me and my mom were like, it was on our last morning in Veradero, and we're like, oh, we're like scrummaging through the bags trying to find cash, and we pulled together $10, and we gave him $10, and he was so eternally grateful for that money, because now he actually has $10 compared to the coins. And a lot of people apparently don't know about that, and I feel like that's a thing that should be researched before you go to Cuba. We saw a lot of old people, unfortunately, tipping coins, and me and my mom were like, oh, you can't use those. But that's just something to do with the currency in Cuba. Back to the Veradero story that I was on. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked. So we went to a market in Veradero for the day. We just wanted a day in town. On the Instagram, you can see the car that we took. Really cool car, by the way, because a lot of cars in Cuba, they're either manufactured and shipped from China or from the 1950s. Because of the embargo, they're not able to get any Americanized cars in Cuba. We were shopping around in this street market. There was a lot of vendors with a lot of beautiful things. Like, I still have a bunch of pretty art and bracelets, a lot of things. I went crazy in that market. And we came across this certain booth. There was a young lady working there. She was like no older than 25. And I wanted to buy an engraved bone necklace for one of my friends. And so we were talking while she was engraving this necklace, and I don't remember who it was. We were just having a conversation. It was either me or my mom who brought up the struggles of what it's like to live in Cuba. And the lady said to us that she wishes she could leave, but she can't because of the economic state in Cuba. And that was really, really sad. She was like, I want to leave, but I can't, because she will never make enough money to leave. And so we bought something else, obviously, because we felt really, really bad. And so a lot of Cubans are trapped by the government because it's so expensive and difficult for them to get a visa and leave. It is incredibly hard. And so this showed me that they might seem happy. Your resort workers might seem happy, and the street vendors might seem happy, but in reality, they want to escape. And Cubans, it's a known fact that Cubans rely on tourism to survive. If there was no tourism industry in Cuba, the country would collapse. So it is definitely highly appreciated, especially when Canadians go there, for them to buy things and stay at expensive places, because that is literally the only way Cubans can make an income, or most Cubans make an income that way. Some of the culture in Cuba, one of the things I noticed is tipping is big. We tipped a lot, pretty much everywhere, even at like our buffet breakfasts, in Canadian cash, because again, that's the most wanted currency in Cuba. And it is so deeply appreciated by every Cuban worker you tip, and you can just see it. It is insane. And to see people not tip is kind of sad. And I know that not everybody can tip that extra $5 Canadian, but when you do, it has a really big impact. Another thing about Cuban culture is that Cubans struggle to get basic necessities. So before our trip, since my mom has already been to Cuba a bunch and she knew a lot about the culture, we went to Dollarama to get cheap shampoos and toothbrushes, toothpaste, kids coloring things, and candy is a big one for the kids, and period products. And we spent around like 200 Canadian-ish dollars. Our $200 that we spent at Dollarama meant so much to all the people, because we left a little bit of it out every single day until it was all gone. And one day, our maid stopped us in the hallway and just said, "Thank you." She was she could barely speak English, but she just said, "Thank you." And on the last cleaning day before we left, me and my mom both received handmade traditional Cuban dolls from her as a token of appreciation, and I still have it. It's on one of the shelves in my room. That experience just really put shit into perspective. when someone is so grateful to have something that is totally normalized in your society, like a toothbrush, it really is shocking to see that, and it teaches a lot. On that Cuba trip, I learned that don't take even the littlest things for granted, because you don't know if you're ever going to have them. And you can just see from the reaction of the Cuban people that is very, very true. They are appreciative of every single little thing that they can have. Another thing is, life isn't about material things. It's about experience and connection. The connections that we made with Cuban people on our trip is incredible. And Cubans are some of the most, if not the friendliest people you could ever meet. They are so nice, and they all really have a great heart. Another thing I learned on this trip is that it doesn't take much to make a big impact on others. With our $200 spent at Dollarama, it went so far, and it really provided that appreciation for the stability that I have in my life, where I don't have to worry if I'm going to have toothpaste or shampoo or the necessary period care that I need, because it's just right there, and I should appreciate that more than I do. And so those are a lot of the lessons that I learned while I was in Cuba, and I am forever grateful for that. And that's also why Cuba was the most impactful trip I've been on. Thank you again to my mom for giving me that experience. I wouldn't have gone to Cuba if it wasn't for you. I love you. Thank you. So after I just talked about where I've been and why I love going to the places that I've been to, I want to talk about where I want to go. Now, there's a lot of places that I want to go, but I've split it up into a few different countries. So yeah, I split it up into 5 different places, but I definitely want to go everywhere. But these are just the top 5 that I can think of. So the first one is Vietnam. Oh my God, I want to go to Vietnam so bad. It is so pretty. Their culture is so attractive. And one of the main reasons I actually want to go there is because there's companies that offer volunteer childcare opportunities there. And that is something I really want to do, is volunteer abroad. Another great thing about Vietnam is their cuisine, obviously, and their beautiful landscape, the rivers that they have, the rainforests and stuff that they have. It is so beautiful, and it's something I definitely want to experience. Another big one is Ireland. A lot of my family history is in Ireland. I want to go there to discover more of my heritage. And there's a lot of impressive natural beauty in Ireland and just the United Kingdom in general. And I want to experience more Irish customs and traditions more than what I practice at home. And I want to connect with my ancestors on the land that they lived on, because that's something very important to me. Another place I want to go is South Korea. I think that South Korea has a great mix of both traditional ways of living integrated with modern technology and how that shapes their society. And I've heard that a lot of people in South Korea are very, very friendly. So that's really amazing. There's a lot of natural experiences that you can find in South Korea, especially the hot springs are a thing that come to mind. And South Korea in general kind of has this more modest culture compared to the West. I feel like they're not as cocky as we are. So I want to experience what that's like to live in that. Another place I want to go to is Croatia. Split and Dubrovnik are stunning ways to experience the Mediterranean. There's a lot of incredible culture in Croatia, and architecture is amazing, a lot of old buildings. And one of the last ones is Italy. Now, of course, the first point I have on why I want to go to Italy is the food. I've had friends that went to Italy and they're like, the food is the best I've ever had. So that is definitely something to look forward to. And another thing is the old architecture that has a lot of stories within it. The old churches and the cathedrals have so much intricate detail. It is insane, and I really, really want to see that. I want to go to the Vatican, the smallest country in the world, if you didn't know. And I just like the way that European cities are set up. They're literally designed for you to be able to walk the whole city and be okay, and I like that. If you see a European city compared to a Western city from above, you can see how that's integrated into how they form their cities. As I move into adulthood, I plan on making travel a priority in my life. The world is our greatest teacher, and I need to see the world I live in because that's what actual living is to me. I can't fully live if I haven't seen the world around me. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Project Honesty. You can find Project Honesty on Spotify at Project Honesty or on YouTube at Project_Honesty. And to keep up to date with new episodes, you can head over to Project Honesty's Instagram, which is at Project_Honesty24. We also have a TikTok, which is Project.Honesty. To help spread this podcast everywhere, tell a friend or share with family about Project Honesty, and you can direct them over to the Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or Spotify to help them learn more. Remember to subscribe and follow for updates for when I post. And remember, the more listeners, the bigger the family. Bye.